Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We're going to switch things up on this episode of Fringe Pop. I am not going to interview our guest, Judd Burton. We've done a few of the interviews about vampires and werewolves. Judd is going to interview me, specifically about my book, The World Turned Upside Down, Finding the Gospel in Stranger Things. So I know you have questions for me about this, and so we thought, hey, why not just do an episode about it? So here we go, whenever you're ready.
I love this show.
Good.
I mean,
that puts you ahead already, because I've done 8 interviews at this point, and 4 of the hosts have never seen the show.
Oh man, that's too bad.
We're off on a good foot already.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan, and I saw a lot of that sort of material in Stranger Things. Mike, why don't you tell me a little bit about how this book came together?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say that this was my idea, but I can't. What happened was I showed up for work one day. I used to work for Logos Bible Software. The corporate name is Faith Life, and we have a print imprint, Lexham Press. And the guys at Lexham came over and said, we have an idea. They knew, again, my bread and butter academically was the supernatural world. I did Unseen Realm and Supernatural and the Angels book. And they also knew that, I do stuff, lectures, whatever, on fringe topics. And they knew I was also a real fan of the show. And so were they. And so they said, why don't we do this book? Because there were already books like this. I mean, there's a book, Finding God in the Lord of the Rings, and Finding God in the Hobbit. So it's kind of a little subgenre of this. And so they got the idea, using them as sort of a stimulus point or a template. And they said, what do you think of this idea? And I loved it from the beginning. I mean, I didn't quite know from the beginning of how I was going to do it. That came really almost instantly later, as I thought about it, for really a few hours. But I thought, man, this would be a great idea. Why not? Because I knew the show well enough to know that it was possible. But again, I didn't have the specific trajectory. That came a little bit later.
Now, you say it was possible, but just watching the show, it occurs to me that there would be some challenges to actually making that happen. How did you overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, this is not... The book is not of this nature, and the show is not of this nature that you would call it an allegory. I mean, it's nothing like that. And I don't think the show's creators are doing anything intentionally Christian. There's really only one scene in the show at the end of season 1 where Hopper, again, puts the Eggos into that box. And people have noticed that the box is actually, sort of an old school Catholic communion box. It has the same design and everything like that. And so people have wondered, is that an overt sort of Christian thing? And it might be. But other than that, 11 is an obvious Christ figure, but nobody's doing Stranger Things as a story to retell in a different way specific Bible stories. This is not allegory. And so I'm actually glad it's not, because that would have sort of made it cheesy. What I decided to do, as I thought about it for a little bit, I had providentially, I think it was quite providential, I had just self-published a little book called What Does God Want? And I self-published this because I wanted a book that was for people who were not Christians, who were thinking about it, seekers. I also wanted a book for new Christians that just gets you into, okay, now that I believe this, what do I do? A basic discipleship book. And so I wanted to control the content of that, which is why I self-published it, because my nonprofit, translates these things and then gives them away. And the first third of that book, though, what I did was I took salvation history. That's a academic term, the way scholars talk about the story of the Bible, what the whole thing is about. And I reduced that to story form. Okay, so you've got essentially what the Bible's about, told, I don't know, 8, 9 pages. It's not very long, but just sort of the unfolding of the story. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that portion of what does God want, and I'm going to map the story elements to the show. And it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
It was so easy to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've watched every episode probably 5 times. I took very detailed notes about what's going on in each episode, and you know, kind of getting into the characters and their heads a little bit, and what the directors might be trying to do in this or that way. So I did that, but it was easy. I wrote this book in only a couple months, because, you know, and I think, you know, those of us who think carefully about literature and film, we know that good storytelling will map to good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And the gospel, salvation history, is a story well told.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has all of the, you know, it has all these big picture ideas, these archetypes, the thoughts about the human condition and purpose and identity, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and Stranger Things does an incredible job of showing the human condition, the human need. And so it really starts at the right place. We could go off on that trajectory a little bit if you want.
Do you think that's the reason it resonates so deeply with people, even people that didn't grow up in the 80s?
Yeah, I think there are several reasons why the show is so popular. I mean, again, to give credit again, my youngest daughter, Simi, for those who read my fiction, this is Summit, okay? She came to me and said, you know, Dad, you really ought to watch this show. And, you know, she knew I was a big X-Files fan in the late 90s. And so I thought, okay, you know, I'll give it a try. And I was hooked instantly because, and here's the first reason I think why it's popular, I was immediately struck by the nostalgia of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's set in the 80s, 1983, and I graduated from high school in 1981. And so I look at the town, it's like, yeah, I know that town. I've been in that town before. I've been in that store before. I've been at this building, that building. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you just see your past.
Mm-hmm.
You really. So I think it hooks adults that are, you know, 40s, 50s, you know, whatever. And it's really clever because the main characters are children. They're middle schoolers. Mm-hmm. So it gets that demographic. Mm-hmm. And my kids marveled, like, was there really a time when you just like rode around on your bikes and like nobody cared and nobody was afraid to do that, and when it got dark you just went home, and yeah, that's the way we grew up. Yeah. I mean, they were astonished, and they wished that you know, they would have had the same experience. Sure. So I think just what it is visually and conceptually draws people in. The second thing I think is it's very overtly putting forth the idea that there is another reality that extends beyond what we experience with our 5 senses. And I think there's a real hunger in people, you know, for that thought. They want to believe that. And to put it another way, the atheistic, materialistic, mechanistic world, universe that we are just fed on a regular basis is quite unsatisfying to most people. Most people want to affirm, again, a greater reality, and the show just taps into that really well. And then I do think the characters are another reason. Every character in Stranger Things is broken. Some of them are broken a little. Some of them are broken a whole lot. They all have attachment issues. You know, of the kids, and I identified with this because I came from a broken home as well. All of the kid characters either come from a broken home or don't have a home at all, in Eleven's case, except for Lucas. And Lucas is the black kid. He's the only one in town. You know, so again, you've got this sense of, I don't really know how I fit in. What's my identity? Later on, as things develop, it's why are we here? You know, what are we doing? So it really hits those sort of major personal needs that you watch the show and you can see yourself in not just one but a couple of the characters in different ways for different reasons.
Right. I'm hearing all this and I'm wondering, of course, the show itself has a large following. Taking all of what you said into account, what is the target audience for your book? I mean, obviously, Stranger Things fans are probably gonna pick up on it, but
this book is for anybody who loves the show, and I am really hopeful that people who have no interest in church or Christianity or Jesus talk, I hope they will read the book either by themselves or maybe talk about the book with someone who is interested in those things, because on one level, if you love the show, you're going to learn in a new way how careful and clever the show actually is, even unconsciously, because they're not doing anything intentionally Christian. What I mean by that is, I think if you're a person who either wants to have nothing to do with Christianity, doesn't even give it the time of day or think about it, if you read this book, I think you're going to be really startled by how well what this show that you do love does maps over point after point after point after point to this Bible stuff, this story about Jesus. It's quite remarkable, actually. And again, we can sit here as academics and think, well, that's because good literature, good visual art is going to play into significant archetypal themes that are present in Scripture. That's true, but that's just an academese way of putting it. When you actually think about the story and where the characters are and the story elements, and see how they not only just sort of have simplistic analogies, but really deep conceptual analogies, I think it's going to be startling to people. The other audience would be Christian kids, youth group. This would be a good discussion starter. Parents could read it to their kids. You'll have good conversations about it. Like, for instance, my first chapter is As Lost as Will Byers. Okay, so the show opens with these 4 kids playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's late. We got to ride home. Will is the kid that gets focused on. They get on their bikes and they go, and then they separate to go to their respective homes. And Will winds up getting abducted. And you, the viewer, know that what abducted him is not something earthly. There's some sort of otherworldly presence, thing, that is responsible for his disappearance. And then you find out that he's in what the show calls the upside down. It's a classic portrayal of the underworld. It's the realm of death and decay. It is inescapable. So from the very beginning, look at how it starts. It starts just where the gospel story starts. You are lost. You have no hope of escape, and if you remain in this place that you can't get out of, you're going to die. And Will knows he's going to die. And every moment he spends in the upside down, trapped, he knows he's weakening, and you can see it happening to him. There's no escape for him. And so it really puts him, and it puts us as viewers, again, if we're thinking in spiritual terms about this, right where we need to be. The only solution to Will's dilemma is an external supernatural power. And that comes in the form of 11, this other character that gets introduced at the end of season 1. It's this girl. The boys are out looking for Will in the woods. It's pouring down rain, and there's this girl out in the woods. Like, where'd she come from? She's dressed in nothing but a lab gown. She's soaking wet. She's their age, 12 years old or whatever. Her head shaved. You're not even sure that she can even speak, when they take her home. She doesn't have a name. She has a tattoo with number 11 on her arm, so they call her 11. I mean, she obviously is totally bewildered with normal life. And she has to learn what the word friend means. So, she is the least likely person in the whole story to actually be the key to saving Will. And then as they grow in their knowledge of what's going on with Will, the supernatural entities and creatures that are in the upside down seeking Will's death and really seeking the demise of the whole town, she emerges as the lone obstacle to that agenda. And they know it, the evil knows it, and 11 certainly knows it, And the kids have to learn this, but she is the key to everything. Everybody's going to die without this external, supernatural force, because she has powers. And the neat thing about it is she doesn't have her powers except by means of suffering. Because you find out 11 was systematically abused in a laboratory setting to develop her kinetic powers and her psychic abilities and whatnot.
Sort of a nod to the Montauk experiments.
Right. And the show actually does that very deliberately, back to the MK Ultra stuff. So it does a real good job of connecting it to real world history. And if you actually follow the chronology, the church hearings in the 70s is when this became public knowledge. And so here we are in 1983. And the person running the lab in the town of Hawkins was connected to this project. So they do it really well. But she, again, has these powers and knows of this other reality and can connect to it because she suffered. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And without her, the whole thing is everybody's going to die. Nothing is going to succeed. I mean, the kids are trying to find Will, and they try to do this and that, but you, the viewer, are thinking, like, this is ridiculous. How are you going to beat this thing, this entity, these creatures and whatnot? And she's the key to everything. And she, because of what she does or doesn't do, things happen.
Right.
We could talk about what I think is the big theological message.
Well, and let's sort of move in that direction. I mean, beyond this just being a sort of hero's journey kind of a story, there for the Christian viewer, there's a Christology that you can tease out here. So why don't you go in that direction? Why don't you tell us that?
Yeah, the kids find out early on, when they find out that 11 isn't normal, that she has powers. Whenever she rescues the kids from trouble, whether it's a bully or something a whole lot more serious, she bleeds, which is very overt. Again, I don't know that the Duffer brothers, the creators, are thinking, well, when they see this scene, they're going to be thinking of Jesus. I don't think that's going on at all. Even though at the end of season 1, 11 sacrifices herself, for her friends and really for everybody else, and has to go into the realm of the dead, the upside down, and then emerges, later on. So in some ways it's telegraphing that, but it isn't done in such a way that it's specifically and explicitly Christian. If you weren't a Christian, didn't know anything about the Christian story, you wouldn't necessarily pick up on these things. But as Christians, it's quite telling. I think even the really subtle things about Christology, like the incarnation. Here you have Jesus of Nazareth, who, again, there's no reason to suspect that he's anything special. It's deity hidden in plain sight. And you get that a lot with 11. She's a girl with a shaved head. I mean, what's going on here? Again, the most unlikely source. And what's really interesting, though, is she desperately wants to be normal. She wants to be, human in that sense. And that's the reading I get, from the Gospels. I think the Gospels are clear that Jesus enjoyed, being humanity. It wasn't a ball and chain for him. It was something that he eagerly assented to do and lived life abundantly. And and here we have 11 who just wants to be in a family. She wants friends, and this is something that she just craves specifically. And at the end of the day, she's willing to give up really anything to have it. And there are just so many trajectories and metaphors that really get into the humanity of Jesus. Again, just retells that or telegraphs some of these points in really significant ways. The conflict with evil, again, when that emerges. I think theologically, what Stranger Things does with intelligent evil is actually quite good. I think the concept of the hive mind is an important one. Not only because by the time you hit season 3, you have the Demogorgon thing, which shows up at the end of season 3, but you've got the Demodogs in season 2. You've got the mind flayer, the Satan figure, the shadow monster running through seasons 2 and 3. And they act and coordinate and think as a collective. Like for Star Trek fans, you'd think of the Borg.
The Borg.
But what's really interesting is its very nature is actually its weakness. Because the hive mind cannot anticipate thoughts and intentions outside of the collective. Now, when it learns one, it never forgets, and it adapts. But this is how, in the show, they get victory. That they win the day, because the hive mind cannot. It's not omniscient. It can't anticipate what's going on outside of it. And this is actually the way providence works. I mean, intelligent evil is pretty intelligent, but it's not omniscient. God is always one step ahead. And God is using human and supernatural agents to work his own plan, that their thoughts are not just part of the collective. He's always one step ahead, or 10 steps ahead, or whatever it is. And I think it's a really good lesson about the limitations of something that we view as a phenomenal power, powers of darkness, yes, and I don't want to minimize that. But it has limitations. And I think that's really well done in Stranger Things. The way it manipulates human behavior, I think, is really well done. It's got the grotesque, Hollywoodish portrayal of evil. It does that. But I think it does it a lot more intelligently than a lot of other shows do.
Have to ask.
Okay.
Favorite episode?
Favorite episode. It's really hard to narrow it to one. I love the episode that has the scene with Hopper at the morgue. That's a turning point in the whole show, because again, Hopper, self-described black hole. Everything I touch, it gets destroyed. Again, self-medicates, womanizes, drinks too much, but at the end of the day, he's this like thing of stone that he does what needs to be done, and at great personal risk. And that scene really typifies it when he, again, giving away spoilers here, but when he has to do what he does in the morgue, you can see it on his face. If I do this, not only am I going to lose my job and probably wind up in jail, but my life will never be the same. But because he does it, everything changes. Then how he can believe Joyce. There is this other reality. Something's going on here. So I think that, or the quarry scene when Eleven rescues, Mike. Those are my two favorite scenes. The closing of the gate's great because everybody does their own part, which is, to me, is a metaphor of how the church should work. I think it's remarkable how between seasons 1 and 2, you can see in the show, everyone who knows that the other world is real, is never the same. It changes them. The way they look at each other, the way they relate to each other. Yes, they have conflict, but at the end of the day, they're going to do whatever they can to save the other people, and they're in everybody's corner. It puts these unparable pairs together in the show that become kind of comical, but it changes them, and they drop everything because they know that this other world is there, and they must act, or we all die. And to me, that's the way the church should be. If you've encountered the Lord, it ought to change you, and the way you look at other people who are your brothers and sisters. It ought to just be the thing that defines the way you go through your life, and for them it is. That's well said. Well, get the book. Yeah, well, watch the series. Thanks for the discussion. I really hope that the book is a great discussion starter for people who are believers or not. I think it will be. So, yeah, I can sit here and recommend my own book, but honestly, this was fun to write, and I think it really will have an impact if people read it. Sure. Very good. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. And thank you for watching this episode of Fringe Pop 321. Please visit our website, fringepop321.com, for information about the episodes that we do. And if you're interested in supporting what we do here, go to fp321.com/S, as in the letter S, and come back and watch some other episodes, because what you know may not be so.